If we were together in person, I'd ask you to tell me how many of you were there with your parent hat on and how many with your teacher hat and how many with both, because often we find teachers have gifted youngsters. And so it's really interesting to me, and I think it's interesting to you, that we all come together to talk about these kids. In the late 50s, May Sego from UCLA and Jean Delp from the Garden Grove Unified School District, they had a theory about giftedness. They believed that giftedness was really a series of high-level intelligence demands upon a person. If you have high-level intelligence, that makes demands upon your behaviors, upon your opinions, upon the way you look at life. And they put together a list of 25 demands of giftedness. We could call them characteristics of the gifted, but I found it very helpful for me when I was dealing with gifted youngsters and gifted adults to realize that these weren't just characteristics, but they were demands that were actually made upon a youngster. And we can't talk about all 25 of them. I'm going to be pushing it, to tell you the truth, to get done by 9, but that's all right. We can at least attend to several of them, and you will find them on the handout that will be available to you, I understand. And the one that probably most parents and certainly most teachers deal with quite a way is the need to know, the ability to ask. They want to know what's going on all the time. And in the classroom, let me tell you, that's really fun. We can build all kinds of units from everything you can imagine, responding to that high-level intelligence demand of find out, find out, find out. And in the school setting, it can develop into many, many independent projects, class projects, things that kids will follow throughout their whole career. Now, at home, that need to know is quite different. At home, they might always say, how much money's in the checking account? What were you and Daddy arguing about last night after I went to bed? Are we going to have any more babies in this family? Those are questions we don't always think are appropriate for youngsters, depending on their age. And it's my experience, and maybe yours too, that they don't always ask at an age we think is appropriate, and I'm absolutely positive they don't always ask at an appropriate time or place. How much money is in the checking account may well be asked of you while you're writing the check at the grocery store, and the clerk would like to know how much money is in the checking account. But there's a demand of high-level intelligence that says find out. Find out what's going on in the world. But it isn't just facts. It isn't just history or math. It's what makes people tick. How far will my mom let me slide on this particular task before she gets me? How will people behave if I do this? How will I be able to do that? And that need to know is really a demand of high-level intelligence. Now, one of the strategies that we always encourage to teachers and parents is to involve them in as many decision-making processes as you can. I don't think they should help you decide if you're going to have any more babies in the family or you take a job on the other end of the continent, but they really can be involved in small items, planning meals. If you're going to buy a refrigerator, every child in the family, except maybe the babies and toddlers, can be participants in the process. How many cubic feet of freezer space will you need? What color does everybody want? And there's a double bonus when you're dealing with gifted kids, all kids, I think, and you ask them to participate in decision-making for the family. They have a buy-in for that. And then they are more bought into the decision, but also it says to them, we value your opinion. We know you're a good thinker. We want you to help us make this decision. Now, the downside of all that is when there is a decision that they are not to be involved in, and there are many adult decisions, then they don't like that a whole lot. They like to be involved with everything. Part of that is their demand to know what's going on. Part of it is the need to be sure that they are participating, and they couldn't even voice that for you. I know an 8-year-old who just kept asking his mother, did you pay the light bill? Did you pay the light bill? And she could not understand why an 8-year-old was concerned about whether the light bill was paid. What he really was interested in was all that information at the bottom of the light bill and how many ohms and kilowatts and how much it cost. And he was fascinated by what it cost to power a house, what it cost to provide light and television and computer access electrically. And who would think an 8-year-old would care about that? So involve them in as many decision-making processes as you can. Okay, let's move on to the next one. We know they have extremely high standards for themselves, and we don't always see them. At school, I've had teachers invite me to look at desks, and sometimes they're the messiest desks in the world. They have more stuff on their desk and in their desk. On one corner is the World Book Encyclopedia disc. On another corner is the Britannica hard copy. This child is going to see if they relate. On the floor to her right is a miniature Grand Canyon. She's building out of vermiculite, and she's going to plant birdseed grass. And on the left on the floor are her rollerblades. That's how she got to school today. And on her chair back are 6 or 7 sweaters that she remembers to wear in the morning, but not home in the afternoon because by then it's warmer. And they're rooms. This is where parents will say, Judy, I don't know, high standards? You should see some of that work that goes in, and you should see the bedroom. Now, first of all, the work that goes in, please know that the teachers are aware of that. Sometimes that work that you saw go to school that looks so sloppy, or you saw syntax problems in the paragraphs or spelling problems, and yet the teacher writes a note on it that says, this is really good thinking. This is so, I can really see you gave this a lot of attention. And sometimes you wonder, is she really looking? Is that teacher really looking at this kid's work? We do. We do look at it. We look for the good thinking and the organization of thoughts and the creativity. But we also look for those other things which are diagnostic. A teacher will read an essay a youngster writes and note if that child needs attention with spelling, or will note if the child needs some paragraphing work or some outlining work. So we want to reward the thinking and then diagnose that which still needs to be taught. Now at home, or still at school, sometimes these youngsters don't turn their work in. They are afraid of turning in substandard work. They'd rather not turn anything in at all. And sometimes we call these kids underachievers. A lot of the time they're not, and believe me, underachieving is another 2 or 3 hour talk. But a lot of times they're just youngsters with such intensity about their own satisfaction with their work. They're not pleased with it, and they'd rather not put it out for critique. We would be happy to see it, and we know they've done it, and we know they've learned from it. But often there are youngsters who will often not turn in the work because it doesn't satisfy them. Now at home, high personal standards don't always demonstrate themselves in the bedroom either. Parents tell me this kid has no standards of high personal standards in this bedroom. It is a disaster area, and it could very well be. It is an interesting phenomenon to me that we want that room so clean, and they don't seem to care. I went through it with my own children who are now grown. That bedroom just drove me crazy because I knew the value of having everything where it belonged, where I could get to it, where I could touch it. And my oldest daughter was very gracious about it. She'd say, oh, don't worry about it, Mom. I don't mind. You know, I haven't lost anything. My grades are all good. And we got to talking about that dirty room more than all the other things that we could have talked about and should have talked about. And she said, you know, we could do what all the experts suggest. And, of course, you know what that is. The experts all suggest close the door. And I said, well, I could try that, but I have to tell you I'd have to have 2 rules. And she says, that's okay. I'd only have 1 rule. And I was a little apprehensive when I heard that, but my 2 rules were these. If her laundry didn't come out, I wouldn't wash it, and that was okay. She learned to use the washer and dryer quickly. My other rule was no food in that room because I knew it would be green and growing and awful. She didn't like that, but she agreed to it. And her 1 rule is that her father and I would not go back on this agreement, no matter what. And I thought, what's no matter what? What could happen? Well, I found out shortly. She said to us one day that her friend Jody, could she come for the weekend? Her parents were going to Vegas. There was nothing for Jody to do in Vegas. Could she spend the weekend with us? And we said, of course, we really like her. Tell her to bring her guitar. And then I witnessed the phenomenon. What I feared would happen is I'd have to start making excuses for that bedroom to Jody or her mother. But what I witnessed was something I should have known intellectually but didn't, is she started cleaning the room herself. She didn't want Jody to see it that way either. About Tuesday, we knew the room had fallen back into disrepair because the door was closed. And it came to me like a flash that that room had to be cleaned for her purposes, not mine. And I think that's one of the toughest things we have to learn as parents is to come to grips. They have to come to grips with their own standards, not ours. Now, I don't believe for a minute that they shouldn't have our leadership and our guidance. That's why God gave parents to kids, I think. But they have to settle on their own standards and their own needs for certain ways of behavior. And their rooms is one way to do it. What I have since learned, which would be another 2 or 3 hour talk, is about youngsters and the safe way to rebel. And, you know, they'll all do that at adolescence, and adolescence is different for all people. You may know some adults who are still going through adolescence, but adolescence does occur, and one of the ways, a safe way to rebel against parents is that dirty bedroom. Now, that doesn't mean that we can just say, oh, well, listen, I read this or I heard someone talking about it. It's okay to have this dirty bedroom. That's just a normal rebellion. No, we still have to fuss about the dirty bedroom. We still have to make an issue of it. If this room isn't cleaned by Saturday at noon, then you can't go roller skating or whatever the standards are at your home. But it is a safe way to rebel along with some other choices that they are allowed to make, because adolescence is all about that. And that would be another very important, interesting session. One of the things that we work with teachers and we work with parents is to be sensitive to what it is that's happening. It's different with every youngster, and parents know their kids so much better than anybody in the world. I want the parents to know. They're the first parents, first teachers, the teachers with the most lasting impact on kids, and they know the sensitivities of their youngsters. Jim Delisle, who's at Kent State, has teachers make 10 promises to their kids, and I think parents could also benefit from those 10 promises. And one of them that has stayed with me forever since I read it first is, there are parts of this child that are as strong as timber, and there are parts of this child that are as fragile as glass. And the parents know those. Now, teachers, we know some of them too, but parents know those youngsters. And we all have to be extremely sensitive to why we don't always see the personal standards, the high standards. Excuse me. And we have to be sure that our criticism can be constructive and helpful and not a way to put a child down. And the dirty bedroom, you can live through that, believe it or not. Okay. We also know that one of the things that, on to number 3, they question authority. Do they ever? They question the principle. They question the veracity of the encyclopedia. They question everything, but mostly, you know, they question parents. At school, we build that in. We hope that they will have classrooms where they feel free to question authority and to question what's going on and to question the lesson, both academic and non-academic concepts. I want a teacher who feels so comfortable in his or her skin and in that classroom that they can allow these youngsters to question them and question their authority. Now, I want these children to be able to do that, but I also want them to do it in a sociably acceptable manner. And the parents have to help us train these youngsters when they're little. Toddlers can understand that concept. They need to know how to question authority and question their parents. At home, I want them to feel safe to challenge the parents, to question them, and to feel like it's okay, that it's one of the demands of high-level intelligence is to question what is. Surely we know that our whole country was built on that concept of questioning what is. And I think we're going through that now and seeing what is happening by questioning what is and what might be. But we absolutely must teach them the courtesies and politeness that go along with this. And parents, you have to start it, we have to help you, and we have to reinforce each other as we go along. Now, I call them survival phrases. I think we need to teach these youngsters what are survival phrases, and they're simple and they're easy, but they aren't assimilated overnight. They have to become a part of the kid and a part of the way the family or the classroom is structured. In my opinion, maybe one of the most powerful. In my opinion, it seems as if, or would you look at my evidence? A very powerful one that I learned not long ago from an older child, a high school kid, is this one. Is there anything I could say that would change your mind? And if you're really honest with that youngster, you have to examine your opinion and your stand on something and then answer that question. But even a little kid can learn to say, in my opinion, it seems as if. Another one would be, it seems as if 100 long division problems are too many to have done before Monday, would be something a fifth grader could say to the teacher, instead of, are you crazy? I have other things in life besides math. And they're very good with their words. You know that that's one of the ways we first know we're dealing with gifted kids. And so we have to be sure that they don't resort to that all the time. My goal is for a youngster, when he's or she is out in the world and maybe has to deal with law enforcement or someone else that they want to impress with their thoughts, their ideas, their opinions, that they know how to approach them properly. And it all goes back to the old thing about you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Kids need to learn to be respectful with their words, and they'll get more done. One of the things I teach youngsters, I taught fifth grade for a long time in Garden Grove, and one of the phrases I taught them, or the question I would ask them, is, what's your objective? What do you hope to accomplish? And in the home setting, that works so well because you can diffuse situations that get really heated or get out of control while you're talking. You can stop and say, I call it instant replay. When my girls were little, everybody would be upset about something, and we'd say, stop. Instant replay, just like old football films. Remember, they'd replay it over and over? Only we would have the privilege of changing it. And before anybody started the conversation over, we'd say, now, what's our objective here? What do we hope to accomplish? Even little kids can understand a phrase like, how do you want this to look when we're done? Or what would you like to happen? And then let's do this over. Because it's a teaching tool. Parents can use this. Teachers use it all the time. It's a way for kids to stop and think before they wade into a conversation or wade into some kind of discussion that could get heated. Now, it doesn't mean it'll always solve every problem, but it helps the youngster prepare for the time when, as an adult with a job, in relationships, they can calmly solve problems. It empowers them. It gives them the ability to move along quicker and not get mired down in the emotions of things. Now, there are times we have to be in the emotions of things. I know that, and that's living. But I would like them to have these skills. I often say that when a youngster has to roll the window down in the car and the police officer's standing out there, I want her or him to have the proper, respectful words to question that authority if they need to, but to do it in a socially acceptable way. And who better to practice on than their parents? And sometimes that's really difficult. In some homes, it isn't appropriate to question parents. And so every home has to make decisions about what can and can't be done in that home. But I'm hoping that if we can teach kids to do it in a respectful manner, and they have the freedom and comfort to do that so they don't feel afraid. And then if we add to that classrooms where clear thinking is honored and where teachers have strong egos enough. My friend Jean Delp used to tell the story about teaching middle school in the Central Valley of California, and she was teaching about truck farming one day. And a kid in the back of the room wasn't listening. He was reading something, and his head was down the whole time. And so she said something about truck farming, and he says, boy, you're dead wrong there, Miss Delp. And she said so many things wanted to go through her mind to say to this kid. Things like, you weren't listening. How do you know what I said? This is my classroom. She said only divine intervention gave her the words to say, What evidence do you have that I'm wrong? And he says, well, I don't know if you'd call it evidence or not. And then he taught the rest of the kids in that class what truck farming was really about, because he'd lived it. He knew it. And that phrase had stayed with her, and it's useful with your kids, it's useful with adults. What evidence do you have that? And then it helps a kid to sort through their thinking. There's a great deal of authority out there in the world, and our kids are verbal, they're glib, they use their words quickly, and I'd like them to have this great foundation to take out into the world. Okay, the next one. My goodness, do they ever have this concentration? We do it too. We've lived a while, most of us, and so we are able to do so many things at once. At school, they can get into all kinds of hot water in a classroom because they're so involved with what they're doing, they really don't hear the teacher, or they can be pretending not to hear the teacher. I saw one day a group of little second grade girls, and they were all in a science center. And this one little girl was so intent on the ant farm. She had theories about the ant farm. She wanted to change the color of the sugar water. She wanted to try putting them in an environment of salt water. She wondered as if that would make them warlike. And she just had all these theories. Well, she's a second grader, and at the end of like about 15, 20 minutes, the teacher moved all these little girls in the science center over to the reading center. And she's an obedient, compliant child, so she went, and her body went to the reading center, but her mind was still back there formulating the things that she could do or should try or wanted to know. Whether ants could hear, were they colorblind, all these questions. So she really didn't get to pay attention much in the reading, and she really didn't get to try out any of her theories in the science center. And sometimes these kids have such long attention spans, even little guys, that they get so involved in something that's going on at school, in that school, and did not get to do either, really, in effect. Now, I want a teacher in that classroom that's very alert to that, who sees that and helps make as many opportunities for youngsters like that to follow through on the things. Now, I know if you're a teacher out there, I know what you're up against these days and how your days are packed full of what you must teach and what you have to accomplish before a certain point. And so I know to say be more sensitive and give them more time to explore what they're really interested in is a difficult thing. Sometimes they'll claim not to hear the directions, but you know what happens to some of them is their mind goes soaring away. For instance, if you're taking instruction from a teacher, well, let me give you a parent example because it's very similar. The child comes to you and you're mom, and you say, okay, Katie, would you get me that picture your dad got at Costco today and bring me a hammer and 2 nails, and would you tell your little brother to come in? It's time for his bath, and you better get your bike in off the yard, honey, so get it in the garage. Now, Katie's a bright, capable child, and she can handle all those instructions. She can hear them. She knows how to do all those things. She's attentive. She's willing to do them, but what happens is her mind goes sailing on the information that has been given to her. And she may come back to mom with a picture and her bike, hopefully, and her little brother. But these are the thoughts that go trailing through her mind. Dad went to Costco again today without me. I wanted to go with him, and I told him, my bike is not out on the grass. I left it over at Sheila's, and she doesn't know it. It might be history. And why do I have to tell him it's time for his bath? He's 8 years old. He knows it's bath time. And then they come back to us, and then we as parents or as teachers say, where were you? I know you're here. I know your ears work, and I know you're a good kid. And their answer is generally, I don't know, because their mind operates quickly on information we give them. I had a 5th grader say to me, the worst feeling in the world, Mrs. Roseberry, is to tune back in just as the teacher says, well, good. If there are no more questions, you can go to work. And you don't know what to do because you listened to the instruction, you learned what she wanted you to do, but then you tuned out and went somewhere else, not because you're an evil little kid, but because that's a demand of high-level intelligence. Keep that mind moving, keep that mind moving. And he was beside himself because he didn't know where to get the supplies, he didn't know how to choose his lab partner, all of those things. At home, it's the same thing. You can tell the child 20 times, don't leave your slippers in the den, it's almost bedtime. Be sure those slippers are picked up, and after they're asleep and in dreamland, the slippers are still in the den. And I think they tune us out. I think they pretend not to hear us sometimes, but sometimes they truly are so involved in what they're doing that their mind is somewhere else. Now, by the same token, they can be at the other end of the house with 4 doors closed, and you're having a conversation quietly, and they come running. Did I hear my name? Are we going somewhere? I don't want to miss anything. So it is very selective, and it's timely, and it's interesting. Parents often say to me, why can't they remember to take out the garbage? It's every Wednesday night. Why is that such an issue? And mostly it's just not a priority with them. That doesn't mean they can't do it. They still must do it, and they must learn to do it. But it just isn't high on their radar of things they are engaged in and thinking about. We're very good at it. I can't see any of you, and you could be doing all kinds of things while you're listening to me. You could be cleaning up after dinner. You could be writing a letter. You could be playing solitaire on the computer. And yet you wouldn't miss the essence of what I'm saying. We've lived long enough to do lots of things at one time. Most of us sit in front of the TV at night, either with a book on our lap or some sewing or letters. We're writing actual paper and pen letters. Have you ever driven somewhere that you drive all the time, and then when you get there you don't remember the journey? That one always shocks me, and I continue to do it because your mind is far away. Even with the radio or the CD player on, your mind is thinking and moving, and sometimes people say to me, I'll read 2 or 3 pages of a book and then not even realize what I read because my mind was operating on some other level for some other thing. So we have to be sure we can get the child's attention. I'll tell you one thing they don't like is having them repeat the directions to you. Now tell me what I ask you to do. I know what you asked me to do. I'm not a baby. Don't you trust me? Yes, I trust you, but I know that your mind is thinking of other things. And I do think, again, this is a time when we have to be really sensitive to their needs and what they're doing. And yet, they absolutely have to learn to tune in. The same 5th grade kid said, give me some clues. If I find my mind wandering, what do I do? How do I tune back in? What are the things I can do? And I said, the biggest thing you can do, my dear, is just mature. As you grow older, you'll become better at this. You'll be more experienced at this. But you can watch if the speaker moves or if the teacher moves somewhere. That should get your attention. Or if the voice inflection changes, if the teacher suddenly is very quiet, or if the teacher is suddenly much louder, that will get your attention. But don't beat yourself up about it. You will learn to do this, and it doesn't mean you're a bad kid. It means your mind is doing what it's intended to do. Okay, we have the next one, which is their need to express their thoughts and their ideas and their feelings. And I'm not necessarily talking about poetry and art and dance and that now. Here I am really interested in the demand of high-level intelligence for youngsters to be who they really are. They may have some unusual ideas. They may seem destined for failure. They may be considered at school to be quite unusual. History is full of these stories, and I'm sure you've read some of them. The Wright brothers were notoriously ill-behaved little boys, and they got into a lot of trouble at school. Churchill failed 4 times to get into the military academy. Emile Zola, are any of you Zola nuts? He got a 0 in literature. Louis Pasteur failed chemistry. And the list goes on and on and on about people who were just unusual thinkers and had different kinds of ideas and different needs from the classroom. Sometimes these are highly gifted kids. Sometimes they're just kids who look at the world in a whole different manner. And I think we have, and at that classroom, again, sometime when we have lots of time, I'll tell you about the perfect gifted teacher I've designed. But that perfect gifted teacher in that classroom knows those kids and knows what their thinking is like, whether they demonstrate it in the way that the school teacher has designed or the way the school requires. Sometimes they do it in a completely different way. And at home, parents need to be patient, and the ideas may seem unusual, and that doesn't mean you have to applaud everything they say. Sometimes you can say, well, I don't know. That's an unusual idea. Let's talk about it. We had a little kid say, I could solve the smog problem in the LA basin if somebody just listened to me. He said, we'll put a big fan like my grandpa has in his store. We put it up in the pass. We plug it in, and we suck all the smog out. And it goes out to Palm Springs out there in the desert. Nobody will care about it out there. And he says, and then it would be done. And a really wise parent or teacher can question that kid. You don't have to say, what a great idea, we'll do that. What we can say is, how big a fan would you need? What would the light bill look like for that? What pass would you put it in? The LA Basin is ringed with passes. And what would happen tomorrow morning in Indio and Palm Springs if all that smog and debris was out there? Would they all move back out into the LA Basin? That kid could study that the rest of his natural life and maybe solve that problem. But the unusual thinking needs to be honored and allowed to roll. And we don't have to jump in and applaud every single idea, but we do need to say, that's unusual, let me think about it, let's research it more, let's talk about it. And there has to be a place at home and in school where these kids are feeling free to say those things. They have to be in a home setting and a school setting. Again, there's my perfect gifted teacher, where they are comfortable to say, I've got this really nifty idea, and I'd like to hear it. A little second grade girl said one day, I was in her classroom, we were making chocolate chip cookies, and it was a math lesson, but I knew there would be hot chocolate chip cookies and cold milk, so I was there for that math lesson. And we were eating them and having a good time, and she says, what would happen if, and there's one of the great openers for these kinds of kids, what would happen if we switched the sugar and the salt in the recipe? Well, everybody said it would taste horrible. She says, I know, but they're both white and they're both granular. What would happen? So I went back the next day and we made cookies with 3/4 cup of salt and a pinch of sugar. And we cooked them, and we didn't eat them because, A, they didn't come out as cookies. They were just crumbs. And the crumbs, we tried them, but they tasted terrible. But then those little second graders sat there and talked about the fact that there must be something about hot sugar that holds those cookies together. And it was a great learning experience, and the teacher paid for the second and the first set of cookie supplies, and those are what we used to call back in the dark ages the teachable moment. Now, I believe the teachable moment still exists. I just do believe it's a harder time for teachers to find that. But we have to teach them self-preservation, and self-presentation, but also self-preservation, so that as they grow older, they know some of their ideas will not be well received. And I think, do we have one more? Yes. This one is a tough one for parents. They're going to seek out intellectual peers. If you are in a district where there is a good gifted program, that it's a little easier for parents because there may be a class or a program where they're together for part of the day. At home, they may seek out older friends, or they may want to be with you and your adult friends. And your adult friends enjoy your kids. And that's a little tougher. Your 9-year-old boy may want to go skateboarding with the 13-year-old guys in the neighborhood because they're more intellectually equal. And you may not want your 9-year-old to do that. You may not want him to be with 13-year-olds and see and hear and do what 13-year-olds do. Or your older kids might want, a high school girl might want to date a college guy. And there's no rule here. There's no pattern. There's no law. You know those kids, parents, better than any of us, better than any educator. Please don't let any teacher ever tell you that we know your child better than you do. Remember Jim Delisle, you know which parts are strong as timber and which parts are as fragile as glass, but you really, truly do know them really well. So that's one of those where you have to know the kid and remember who's in charge. It's you. Gene Delp used to say that one of the things we should do with our kids is let them know who we are as people, because it helps them with who they are as people. And storytelling should be big in your family. Tell them stories about when you were a kid. They don't have to be perfect stories. Maybe you got in trouble. Maybe you made some big mistakes sometime. Tell them what you're comfortable with telling them. But tell them the good, rich stories about childhood and things you learned and things you did, because those storytellings build you as not just mom and dad, but as a parent and as a person, as a person with a life separate from the youngsters. And the last thing I'll leave you with that Jean used to say is we need to teach these kids as if they were our intelligent adult friends. That doesn't mean we don't parent, but we pay the same respect to them that we would to our intelligent adult friends. That's what I'd like to share with you tonight. And Amanda, you want this 5 minutes here for something?
Yes, ma'am. Let's go ahead and get to some of these questions as much as we can. All right. So the first one I have, let me scroll back up here. One question was, what about kids that just give up? They hate school. It's boring. What are your recommendations for that?
Well, it's not a quick answer. First of all, I always tell kids that only boring people get bored. Now, I always tell youngsters that I teach, listen, I'll do everything in my power to make this a joyous experience, but you're my partner. You cannot sit down on this job and expect me to be the television set. We are in this together, and you must have other things going on here in this classroom besides what I'm teaching you. But the real honest-to-God truth is sometimes it may be boring for kids, and the parent has to be vigilant and look into that. And and kids who are bored who will either get into trouble or just simply not enjoy school and could even